You're hanging out in the House of Sunny podcast, where it's always sunny, mostly because of your host, comedian and YouTuber, Sunny Lohman. Want to know what Sunny and her friends are thinking about this week? Well, here she is, Sunny Lohman.
Hey everybody, welcome to the House of Sunny podcast once again. Today we're going to talk about the Department of Justice's lawsuit against Google. And actually we were going to talk about that anyway, not that specifically, but big tech censorship because of what they did, what they're doing with the election and what they did with the New York Post story. We were going to talk about that anyway because I got a comment on YouTube from one of our regular commenters, Oligarchy Slayer, that I wanted to address. And it's just kind of too complicated to address in a comment. So I'm like, hey, Doug, let's talk about this. And then yesterday, the DOJ filed their lawsuit. So it's actually kind of newsy. I'm going to read the comment to you, and then Doug and I are going to just kind of talk about our opinion. Apparently I said that I am for using antitrust against the big tech firms. I'm like, I didn't say that. He's like, you did say that. Okay, so we'll talk about it. Hey, Doug, what's up?
How are you? I'm good.
So we're recording really early. For California time, it's early because Doug has to go pick up a gun. His
That's
gun
right.
that he
That's
left behind in a house somewhere in Minnesota.
I
won't say where you're driving from.
You're already giving too much information away.
I know, right?
I have to sneak
I'm not
around.
telling where you're from, but here you don't live in Minnesota. You're actually going kind of a fair distance in order to. I mean, you got to retrieve your guns, right?
That's right. Well, I forgot a gun somewhere, which is something no one should ever do. And
Right.
a friend who shall remain anonymous pick up said gun and has been holding the package, as we call it.
That's right. That's so funny. Like back in the olden times, 20 years ago, this would have been a non-issue. But today, like, guns are such a sensitive topic.
That's right. This is like no big deal, right?
It's no big deal. One Midwesterner leaving a gun with another Midwesterner would be like a non-issue.
But this is kind of, I feel a little Wild Westy though about it. Just even though it's not, it's like, I'm going to get a gun. That's awesome.
I'm going to pick up my gun.
That's right.
Driving across state lines to pick up a gun. You could get a charge like Kyle Rittenhouse. One of his big crimes was he took a gun across state lines. Oh no! Did you see the left freak out about that? When I lived in Minnesota, like monthly, I crossed state lines into Wisconsin, and because it's right there. I mean, what's the big deal? Or into Iowa? I mean, what is wrong with people? Hell, I crossed country lines into Canada several times in the summer, just in a canoe. So
yeah, I'm sure Daniel Boone and our forefathers were like, "Oh, Daniel, did you declare your gun to the state authorities before going from Kentucky to Tennessee?"
Right. Did you even know you crossed the line? It's like woods. All right. So let's get into this. I think the first thing I'm going to do is read this YouTube comment. I'm not going to show it to you guys. You can go to the video from last week and read it if you want to. But as everybody knows on here, I'm an objectivist. I purport to be a laissez-faire capitalist, I guess. I'm not really sure what that means anymore. I realized that I sort of accepted that label without critically thinking about it. I kind of thought I know I thought it meant basically the same thing as the Constitution of the United States, basically, with maybe some changes. But I don't think people get that. I think there are libertarians who think it's kind of more of an anarchy situation than a limited government situation. But when you have limited government, then you have to ask yourself, limited where and how and when does the government step in? And I think that those are the questions that we're dealing with right now with respect to big tech. But here's the comment. Sunny, I don't think you're a laissez-faire capitalist anymore.
Oh, no.
Laissez-faire capitalists don't call for antitrust laws just because they don't like the politics of the business owner. That is true. That is absolutely true. Stop calling for the violation of property rights. If you want to call out what they are doing, that's one thing. But you crossed a line here. You are pleading for the government to force these business owners you don't like to platform people they don't want on their site. Moreover, if you strip these tech companies of 230 protection, you will kill all social media. Kiss YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, and Insta goodbye. They will be held liable for everything. You've allowed the left to live so rent-free in your head, they turned you into a pragmatist on this issue. You're entering Tucker Carlson levels of cringe here. By the way, I love Tucker Carlson. I mean,
that's a compliment.
I freaking love that guy. Please, Sonny, don't do it. I've found your content clever for years, but that authoritarian take wasn't freedom-based. Okay, so, I mean, this is a legitimate point, right? This is a legitimate point.
Absolutely.
And actually, thank you, Oligarchy Slayer, for your comment. I do appreciate it.
And in fact, I've adopted his criticism, and now I hate you.
Okay.
I'm out.
You're canceling me.
You're blocked.
My co-host just canceled me. Hey, everybody, by the way, Doug is, your expertise is the economy.
Correct.
And you're a free market. You're a free marketer just as much as anybody, I would say.
Of course.
You have studied Mises. You have really studied these issues philosophically. More than most of us, you've written about it extensively on your blog. So we're going to get into this, and you're probably going to be more deeply philosophic and capable of talking about this than I am, particularly as it relates to history. But this was such a good comment. And one of the things I really appreciated about it, one of the things I've done is I've gotten older and wiser and spent more time paying attention to politics since 2010, is I have started to just be more open to questioning the labels that I slapped on myself, like laissez-faire capitalist. And so when I read that for a minute, I thought, am I still a laissez-faire capitalist? That's a legit question. And I am open to saying, no, I'm not. I think I am. So let's talk about it. Maybe I'm not. Like somebody the other day said something about me being a racist. And it was a friend, and they were just saying, well, you know, if you have that view, you're a racist. And I was like, I guess by today's standards, I am a racist if I have the view that you can actually judge people based on groups to a degree. You're always in front of an individual every time. But when we've talked about this before, if they're from the lawyer group, you can kind of say, well, lawyers have this tendency. If they're from the Black community, you can say, you know, there are things that you're looking out at and seeing about whites and Blacks and Mexicans. They're cultural
factors, attributes,
generalizations. That doesn't mean that every individual lawyer is a shyster. It means a lot of them are, you know, and not allowing yourself to group people is epistemologically really bad for you. It causes you to have to encounter everything you see as some sort of, you can't do that much thinking. You have to, concrete. As a new concrete. And this is what Ayn Rand said. You have to generalize, you have to conceptualize, or you can't understand the world. It doesn't mean that you go dogmatist on everything, and everything you see, you slap a label on and you're done. You have to consider what you're seeing, the facts and objective reality all the time, but you have these generalizations to help you assess things quickly. And I guess that's kind of how I think of this issue. So where do we begin, Doug? I think
we need to unpack a bunch of terms and ideas here, because there's some validity, of course, to what the commenter is saying. And however, you know, context is key, and so are how we define these things. You know, let's start with the idea of laissez-faire capitalism, because, you know, under laissez-faire does not mean anarchy. So in the context, you know, if we start with a pure laissez-faire sort of economy in the way that I think you and I would espouse it, there's still law, you know, there's still contracts, there's still a government.
There's a government enforcing those contracts.
Right.
It's so this idea, and Ayn Rand said this, and maybe this isn't the best formulation, this complete separation between economy and state is actually not possible. Because would that mean that law doesn't enforce contract rights, and then you wouldn't have contracts because it would just be thug rule?
Right. And I'm sure the commenter, and again, we're not implying any of this on the commenter. I'm just speaking kind of generally here to kind of frame the issue. So I'm not trying to put words in anybody's mouth, but I've heard this argument. I've been arguing this for years. So, I mean, the first point is that we don't have anarchy. And so, you know, there's still such a thing in a laissez-faire system as contracts, tort law, liability. There's still common law precedent. There are very technical legal distinctions that are made between, for example, publishers and platforms. We can get into that in a second. There's also such a thing as public square law, which we can get into again in a second. So there's
a lot of complex legal stuff here. The Section 230 stuff.
Well, I don't want to. Yeah, I'm not. What I'm saying is, before you even get into our current situation and the laws that exist, I think you have to just sort of start with, okay, even under the freest of free systems that most of us would espouse, outside of total anarchists, which I don't think you or I believe in, you know, there's still a legal system and there's still laws. For example, if I contract you to fix my roof and you don't fix my roof, or, you know, you burn my house down, I wouldn't say, well, that's laissez-faire. No, nothing I can do. You know, of course, you and I, you know, again, I don't think the commenter means that, but my example is, you know, we still believe that there needs to be a legal system to enforce contracts and to settle disputes. And there's still ways to legally codify some of these relationships, particularly as they occur across state lines and so on and so forth. So, you know, the fact is that there's a whole spectrum of laws that can be brought to bear here. And some of them I think are illegitimate and should not be used against big tech, and some of them should. Now, my point is, what's our goal in politics? Our goal is we want a free society. And so we want to maximize our freedom in the long run.
Yes.
And if you hurt, you know, I agree, if you hurt your enemies now, with the price being massive government control in the long run, that's not good. We don't want that. Conversely, if we destroy our side now and allow the enemy to win, there may not be a long run for us.
Yeah, I think this is the hardest thing, because how do you judge when you're in that short-term scenario where you can't? I don't think you should ever give up thinking long range. That's not what I'm saying. But obviously there are times where you have to take extraordinary measures. But part of it too is, you know, the goal, the thing you always have to think about is maximizing freedom. And also, and I believe, so here's something someone said to me some years ago that really helped me. And that was, as an objectivist, there's this tendency to put capitalism, and libertarians do this too. And this is actually the libertarian, this is why Ayn Rand didn't kind of, you know, complained about libertarians, is to put capitalism above everything else in philosophy, to put laissez-faire or economic freedom above ethics, for example, or your own survival, ethics meaning your own survival. So there does come a point where you have to take your life first, you know, and you could take that idea and run with it and do all kinds of bad things and justify all kinds of bad things or rationalize all kinds of bad things. Like, well, I need to attack this person because it's in my self-interest. So even though, like, this is like the Antifa argument, we need to hurt these people now. They're Nazis, so they deserve whatever they get, and because we value freedom. It's the most twisted bullshit.
That's right. Yeah.
Meanwhile, they're out there aggressively just hurting people And that's how they rationalize it. So I can see that that's kind of, it can look like a slippery slope.
It is. And I think we don't want to compromise freedom in the long run. So my view is it's really just a tactical question about how do you preserve your own life now, maximize freedom in the long run, and not jeopardize it. And so the way I look at this tactically, if I'm trying to design a plan, it's what kind of, let's call them pro-freedom tactics can we use to impede or destroy the enemy while retaining our freedom in the long run. So I like you said, I don't advocate going out and shooting anyone I disagree with, even if I think they're really evil, because that's not a really good precedent to set, because that's an obvious case of where if we enabled that, some sort of like vigilante justice in the way that the Antifa people see themselves, that precedent can then be turned against you and would ruin our life and ruin our society. So are there pro-freedom
you know what?
tactics?
I think a lot of pro-freedom Americans get that. I've been wondering all summer, why aren't more of these peaceful protesters being shot? And I think that it's because a lot of us Americans who believe in freedom and believe in the Second Amendment don't want to shoot anybody. Like we find that hurting people really wrong. And we'll be the last people to even defend ourselves with violence because we don't want that. We don't want that for ourselves.
Right, because once you enable it, then it can be turned against us. So we're willing to sort of shoulder a lot of crap,
take a
lot of crap, and take a lot of blows with the idea that, hey, we rather preserve our long run freedom and even let these clowns burn down some buildings, so to speak, rather than just engage in a massive civil war right now, which would take our lives and our country to a whole new level of dystopia that we don't want. So we're trying to settle this in sort of a civil way, in a reasonable way, using the laws that are available to us to fight back.
And the voting booth, because I think people are like, well, the election's right around the corner.
Yep.
And then this whole thing will just kind of quiet down, because we know a lot of it is fomented by the left in order to control the election or to affect the election. So we have this conundrum where we look out at reality and we have this really big problem. We have all of Silicon Valley and these big tech companies colluding. They are colluding. Just look at the Alex Jones example. They got together and in one night, Alex Jones was disappeared. They've gone after Alex Jones' ability to bank, his ability to even have a website. They've gone after his ISPs. And by they, I mean the pressure, government. And I think a lot of this is coming from big corporations too. And there was an article in Wired not that long ago talking about how Zuckerberg, the main pressure coming at Zuckerberg was from these big media oligarchs with their political cronies putting pressure on Facebook to censor conservatives. And Zuckerberg was resisting it for a long time, but then after 2016, that was it. He couldn't do it he couldn't resist it anymore. And the culture within Facebook is now pressuring him as well. He's getting pressure from inside, and he's lost all of the right-leaning employees and board members. So it's just the environment has changed. But okay, so my point is, we're looking at reality and we're seeing really bad stuff going on in big tech, and some of it is just ethically bad. But some of it is legally bad or potentially legally bad. I happen to think that the terms of service thing is a really nasty way of doing business that seems really wrong to me and seems like it's not, I'm no lawyer, but it just doesn't seem right. It's so unjust that people can sign up, give away their information, spend years and the effort it takes to make video content and build your subscribers. It's so much freaking work. And you go through all of that based on this stable, neutral platform idea. And then whoop, they take it away because they don't like your politics. That seems like they shouldn't be able to do that to me. It seems really unjust and evil. And all of the Silicon Valley companies did that after 2016. They just started kicking off creators right and left. And, you know, one really great example too of what's happening. And so this also isn't just private companies acting. It's government acting. And we don't know everything going on behind the scenes, but we've seen in public Democrat Congress people pressuring and Soros making comments, oh, they need to censor this misinformation. And, you know, they couch it in it's unsafe. And they've done this with vaccines. Like, you cannot post about anti-vax stuff. If you post about vaccines, your stuff's going to get taken down. They have agendas that they're pushing. These are big corporate agendas with government. So these are fascist agendas. And that's happening. You're naive if you think that's not happening, in my opinion. But so you have these companies colluding. They're anti-free speech. So that's evil. They're trying to silence half of America, the opinions of half of America, or more than half of America, in order to further their own political agenda. And people are like, oh, don't call it censorship, whatever. They have a right. Okay, they have a right to kick off of their platform anybody they want. I feel like I'm not speaking in logical order here, but I wanted to back up and say something about what we're seeing out there, because we have to start with the facts rather than the politics. And the facts are, we're watching people get censored. We're watching collusion. One of the biggest examples of censorship that I saw was when Patreon kicked off Carl Benjamin, Sargon of Akkad. You know, he had built up this base of people that basically paid his salary. He was getting his income off of Patreon. They were benefiting from him being on that platform and announcing to hundreds of thousands of people that he was on that platform. So they get benefit. You know, they're getting something in exchange. They're getting fees. And then they decided they took him down by going back years, finding on, not even on his own content, on a podcast, he used some word, I think he used the N-word, in context of explaining something about it, not calling people that. But they went back years, found him on some obscure thing 1 minute, and they kicked him off Patreon for that. So he goes over to Subscribestar, and that week, Subscribestar got deplatformed. So the competitor got deplatformed. It wasn't even just the content. Oh, we don't like conservatives. They try to go to a competitor because Patreon doesn't like conservatives. And that competitor got debanked that week when everybody was doing a mass exodus to them. PayPal, MasterCard debanked them. So you can't freaking tell me, oh, there's competition. There is no fair. There's no laissez-faire here. I'm trying to find the laissez-faire that I'm supposedly against, to be honest, because what I'm seeing is not freedom. I don't see freedom there.
Right. And I think it's helpful to maybe clarify a couple points here, which is that there's what we would promote in a laissez-faire context and what the reality is now. So we always have to keep those two things in mind. Like, what are we talking about? What do we sort of promote ideally? And what is the current situation and how to fight against the current situation? The other clarification is that I think there's a business practice issue going on here versus First Amendment. So, and I don't think we should completely confuse the two. Now, when Prager, this is really helpful, Sonny, I think, to maybe think about Prager's lawsuit, which they launched against Google and YouTube, I think in 2016 or so, or 17, after YouTube demonetized Prager. And they made a lot of the same arguments in their lawsuit that we're making here, and they came at it from two different ways. And I think there's two different prongs here. So first of all, they said, and this I think gets to the laissez-faire argument. First of all, they said, hey, this is unfair business practice. Screw First Amendment or anything else. Like, let's just say this is a private company and let's just assume they can do whatever the hell they want. Well, they have a contract and they have terms of service, and they have induced people and content creators onto their platforms to create content. Those people like Prager and others, Alex Jones, all these other people that have been demonetized, they've brought customers to these platforms, and those
That's
platforms have benefited from all those customers and all that advertisement that went on. These content creators, as you said, spent millions of dollars building, their infrastructure, their content, and doing all the videos and whatever, creating all this stuff. And then in 1 second, they're demonetized for almost no reason. I mean, we know what the reason is. They don't like them.
But what people are saying is they don't need a reason. They can do whatever they want anytime. And there doesn't need to be a reason. Of course, we know the reason is actually evil. That's the other thing to keep in mind here. These people are freaking evil.
But my point is that just like in the roofing, if I contract you to fix my roof and you burn my house down, I have legal recourse against you. I mean, you have engaged in false advertising, and this is one of the planks of the Prager lawsuit, was under the Lanham Act, for example. You can't false advertise. You can't say, hey, we're a neutral platform, come on and create content and go crazy. So there's an issue of not only false advertising, but then there's a breach of good faith. In commercial contracts, there is implied good faith and there's implied duty. And so when you enter into a contract commercially with someone, there's a spirit and a letter of the law, right? So you could say, well, technically, if you read the fine print, it says we can, deplatform you for, something that's whatever. But if the spirit of the agreement was, hey, you let us on here for years and years and we built up this relationship and you never said anything, you never gave us warning, you never told us how to remedy whatever violation there was, and suddenly you just kick us off out of the blue like overnight and you just ruined our business, well, you have a huge tort liability here. Like,
yeah.
So just in like laissez-faire terms for the libertarians,
yeah,
this is like a huge problem business practice wise to do this. And
I just don't know how this thing even got like this, because what other industry can you do a contract, get someone to agree to it, and then change it? You're welcome to change it for the next user who's just signing up. But then you do that, as you evolve and you realize, I'd really like my contracts to say this instead of that. But you don't get to change it for everybody just because you decided you didn't like something or you want to adjust it. But like you said, there is a good faith thing here that they have clearly violated. I mean, these are injustices. You can look out and see that this is an injustice. One person put all the work in, the other person didn't do their part. So then, Prager's lawsuit accused them of these sort of like unfair business practices. And I consider this. You read it, right? You read this lawsuit.
Yeah, I read the lawsuit. Yeah. And now the lawsuit was initially filed in federal court. There were 2 federal court claims that Prager made. One was a First Amendment claim. And again, like, we have to distinguish these. So they made a First Amendment claim, and they also made an unfair competition and false advertising claim under the Lanham Act. And they made 5 claims under California law, including a free speech claim and discrimination under the Unruh Act, unfair, unlawful, and fraudulent business practices, breach of contract. So the way Prager came at this was twofold. They were making a kind of an unfair business practice argument, but they're also making a First Amendment claim, which gets us into public square law. So I think we should distinguish these two. Again, I don't think anyone of us out there who's reasonable could say that this is not unfair business practice. I mean, this is obviously a breach of contract, a breach of terms of service. I don't care what fine print is in there. it's a breach of good faith
That's right.
under
That's right.
commercial contract law. And so, that alone, besides the immorality of what they're doing, that's a great way to approach this. That's unfair business practice.
Right. So even under old school, laissez-faire, where you have the government just enforcing contract law and common law, basically common law, there's some problems here, some potential problems. So the dismissive, you can't do anything because
they can just do whatever they want.
They're a private company. We don't live in that world, and we never have. And I don't support that. I don't think any business should be able to do whatever they want. I don't.
No, because there is a contract here. And so, the idea that, a private company can just do whatever they want because they're a private company is absolutely absurd. Now, there might be.
It's never been like that. It's never in the history of anything ever been like that.
No.
And so this, it's not even just a mixed economy issue. That, or, we're living under these antitrust laws or whatever, which
that's so
far we haven't even talked about
laissez-faire argument. You
right.
can't do that. That's fraud. That's
also
absolutely prohibited.
This 230 thing was put in place as a special protection, and they're obviously violating that as well. So that was actually not laissez-faire protection that they got. So what people are talking about is removing that and letting them fend. Okay, fine. You don't want this special protection. You don't want to be neutral. Well, fine. We're going to unleash you. You're going to have to deal with regular common law liability. Well, there's respect to what you've got on your site.
There's a couple of issues with Section 230. We should back up a little bit because, there's, Prager's making a First Amendment claim, and they're also making a public square claim, and there's also there might be a Section 230 claim. But now I've read arguments against this, so I want to be clear that what this is. Section 230 was put in place as part of the FCC Act because they wanted to, quote unquote, promote the internet. And what they were worried about was platforms getting sued left and right and being held liable for the content of the creators on their platform. So the YouTubes, it wasn't YouTube at the time, it was Prodigy or whatever, but let's say, YouTube or Twitter or whatever, someone defames or libels someone, they don't want to be held responsible for every single tweet that comes across their platform, and they don't want to get sued left and right. So there was this idea that by creating this carve out where they're not publishers like a newspaper, they're not the New York Times, they're not Fox News, they're not a curator of content or really a moderator, they are a platform. And so by virtue of that, they have this special exemption where they're shielded from liability for the content that comes across their platform. Now, others have argued against my position here, and that's probably I'm not a lawyer, but people have said, well, Section 230 also provides them immunity for demonetizing and for moderating content. So they can't be held liable. If they moderate content, they also can't be sued for that. So there's sort of a legal argument there, but the point that we're making is, okay, if that's true and the government has gone through this effort to make this special liability shield, which conferred billions and billions of dollars of market cap on these companies, because by giving them a liability shield, right, you're inherently increasing the value of YouTube, Google, Twitter, Facebook. All these companies can't get sued. So that's huge for them. So if you're going to do that, you better make the rules very, very clear in the law. So if you're going to make a law giving them a liability shield, you can't say, oh yeah, you guys, you can't be held liable, but you can also do whatever the hell you want. And you can demonetize and curate content and moderate carte blanche, and you get liability shield no matter what. That's bullshit. So even if you think I'm wrong and that Section 230 allows this, well then I would change my argument and say, let's reform Section 230 and make it very clear what the rules are, that if you're going to be a neutral platform, you can't curate or moderate content.
Yeah. And so, but what there has to be, even with that, I want to, people have said, well, they shouldn't have to support what they don't like. And, or for example, it's pretty obvious that if you want to be Facebook, you're allowed to say no porn. So there are people, but they say that up front, no porn. Don't then try to do porn on Facebook and be surprised when you get kicked off.
Right.
But what they've never said is no conservative ideas.
Exactly.
And then they've gone to Congress and said, oh no, we don't. I mean, they've lied. We don't censor conservatives. They've lied.
Well, so Dorsey went in front of Congress, and I posted an article on my page today from 2018.
I'm totally going to show that. I'm going to show that. Should we do it now?
Yeah. So Dorsey,
hang on a sec.
And while you're doing that, let me explain this. So there's a concept in law called public square law. And so this came out of a 1940s case where a Jehovah's Witness was passing out literature in a town owned by a company. So there's one of those company towns where the corporation owned the entire town. And this Jehovah's Witness was passing out religious literature. So the town said, hey, we don't want you doing that. This is our private property. Get out. So he went to court, and the court ruled that First Amendment protections applied to the Jehovah's Witness, even on private property, because this was a quote unquote public square. It was an area or a place where, there was a expectation that, you were in effect in the public. And so Jack Dorsey, when he was in front of Congress, said, Twitter's a public square. Twitter's a public square. He said it more than 5 times while he was testifying to Congress. So, again, Prager argued, well, okay, hey, if this is a public square.
We believe many people use Twitter as a digital public square. And we believe that the people use Twitter as they would a public square, the value of what they're giving to that digital public square. We believe many people use Twitter as a digital public square. Twitter cannot rightly serve as a public square if it's constructed around the personal opinions of its makers. We believe a key driver of a thriving public square, we believe it was important for us to continue to increase the health of this public square. We believe we're used as a public square.
Whoopsies.
So Prager argued, okay, hey, if you're a public square, if you're a digital public square, then you're subject to First Amendment protections. Now, the Ninth Circuit, the Prager case got thrown out of federal court, and they said, hey, you have to go to state court. And so I believe they're probably in state court, but they also went to the Ninth Circuit, which is the horrible federal court. And I read an amicus brief by the Electronic Frontier Foundation or whatever that was arguing against Prager. And they were saying, oh, no, this is not a public square. You can't make that argument. These platforms need to be able to do whatever they want, and it's not fair to force them to host content that they find objectionable. And so then the Ninth Circuit agreed with that and actually told Prager, no, this is not a First Amendment case. These firms can do whatever they want, and these are not public squares. So the first round of this, I think, in the horrible Ninth Circuit went against them. But I have kind of mixed feelings here, because I do believe that in the context that they're using these platforms, particularly given Section 230 immunity, they are a public square. And so I think they do have a First Amendment obligation. Now, what does that mean? Does that mean that they have to host absolutely everything? Maybe. And again,
well, but
don't just say,
no,
my point is, don't just say, go ahead.
You can't go to a park, the public square, and take your clothes off. I mean,
right.
there are limits to freedom. There just are, because you can't force other people to look at your naked shit, your junk.
So there's a lewdness.
Unlike Tubin, he likes to,
Sonny,
do that.
Just so you know, I'm doing
Oh
something
no,
right.
Don't even say that. Gross. Gross, man.
That's why there's no video.
That's why there's oh my God. Yeah, you were supposed to do video this week and still no video because you're just not over your habit there, hey?
Well, the whole Tubin thing threw me for a loop, so I've got to reassess. I gotta reassess
What if I forget to hide my video?
My whole paradigm is now shifted. So
all right. So
but anyways, my point is just that there is a good argument on both sides. And however, Twitter is telling you they're a public square. I mean, the CEO just said he is. So is there a First Amendment obligation? Maybe.
They're trying to have it always. They're trying to have it always, and the user/customer just has to freaking put up with it.
Right.
And no other business does that. You can't do that. It's not fair. It's not just. And so just taking out the politics and taking out like even the legal arguments, you can look out in reality and you can see that there is something really unfair going on, something really unjust. When somebody can pour millions into their side of a contract and the other company doesn't have to do anything.
Well, now think of this too.
Imagine destroy what has been built in a push of a button. It's not fair. And they lured people in with this neutrality. They had a certain kind of business. And now they want to change that midstream and screw everybody, and you can't do it. If you shut down, start up another one. That's what you get to do. And you get to say, here, we're going to start Facebook Democrat. Come on over. Nobody would go, and they know it. So they have gotten traffic and people based on a certain business model that's what they advertised. That's why people came. That's why people put content on there and spent all that time and money doing it. And then they changed the rules. And you can't do that in business. That's not fair business. So honestly, all these legal things, like I think try them all because they have to be stopped from doing with hopefully legit laws like this. I mean, these are all legit laws that we're talking about.
Well, okay, here's another one.
Common law.
Now, if you're on the telephone.
Legit ways of going after these companies.
Can the phone company prevent you from speaking freely on their phone?
You there, Doug?
Can you hear me?
Did we lose Doug?
Hold on.
Hello. Where's my phone? Are you muted, Doug?
I got to make sure I'm not muted. No.
We're going to be editing this part out.
Hold on.
All right, we got Doug back. We don't know what happened. I don't even know what we were talking about. Okay, so I think we've established that even based on just regular old-fashioned good laissez-faire law, contract law, there's some problems here. There's some really big problems. And the argument that, well, if you do this 230 thing, you'll destroy the internet. I didn't destroy the internet. They did. You know what I'm saying? Like if they're violating contract law and we then take them down over it, that's not on us. Like that's on them. And the thing that I see very clearly is that you can't compete with these companies, and not because, they're so great. They stifle competitors using government.
Well, a good example of that is when the Obama administration was debanking gun shops or gun manufacturers and porn shops and stuff like that. So again, let's go from laissez-faire into reality here, which is the real world now. And the point is that if you're on a telephone, the phone company can't jump in and say, hey, I don't like what you just said. We're going to cut your phone service. A bank, which is highly regulated by the government, and it takes, you have to get a charter and you have to get approved and you have to be regulated by the state in order to open a bank. So the bank is a public square, under this public square idea. So if the bank doesn't like us because we're conservatives, they can't cancel our bank account. But that's what they're trying to do. I mean, that's what these digital companies are trying to do. And so you can't have it both ways. You can't say, hey, we're a public square, we take all comers, we're neutral, come and use our service and, have a $1 trillion market cap on your stock. And then at the same time say, oh, by the way, if we don't like you, we're just going to cut you.
Yeah.
It doesn't work that way, especially in a society where we do have banks, utilities, and public square ideas where there's this mix of, regulated entities, public square entities. For example, a hotel can't discriminate and say, oh, we don't, we're not going to let Black people stay here anymore. There's civil rights issues, and there's a whole slew of law here that applies to so-called public square venues.
But if you're going to promote that, like as a laissez-faire person, you would actually say, well, a hotel should be able to decide they don't want to allow Blacks.
Yeah.
So we're actually against those types of things. Like, people are allowed to be racist. It's a free country. And so people are allowed to hate conservatives. But the problem is that they lied and they defrauded the conservatives. They set up one kind of world and one kind of contract, and then they decided to change it when they felt like it. And you can't, it's not fair. It's not right. And in the meantime, like in the example of Sargon, where when people tried to leave Patreon in protest and go to a competitor, that competitor was itself deplatformed. That competitor had no political leaning. They just wanted to be an open platform for anybody. And they were taken down. And I'm sorry, like, that shouldn't even be possible. So there's some stuff going on here. And I think it's naive to think, well, just start your own company, whatever. It's tough. Hey, I wanted to show something. I wasn't going to show this, but based on what we were just talking about, the banking, I shared this the other day in the Elite Squad, which you can join, by the way, if you become a subscriber over at Subscribestar or at houseofsunny.tv. Oh, let me just make sure I'm sharing the sound here. Sound issues when I played clips, the sound didn't show up in the recordings, and I didn't have time to go back and fix it. So hopefully this works this time. You are screen sharing. Okay, I'm gonna play this video. Can you hear that? Wait, the mute button.
Your money,
your values.
Yep. It's time to bank for good.
It's time to bank for good. Banking is going to be about
when you make a deposit,
environmentalism.
Your money isn't just sitting. Only about
10% is being held by the banks. The rest is being invested
in whatever ways the banks see fit.
It could be getting invested in planet and
people destroying industries.
Oh my God.
Okay, now we're going to go after banks for investing in oil and gas. That's how we're going to take down oil and gas.
Wow.
All right, we can't do it with legislation. Nobody really wants this. So we're going to cancel banks that don't toe the line with the radical left. This is an ad.
When something isn't right.
Do you see that they just tied it into Black Lives Matters? Look at these visuals.
Yep.
BLM. Righteous, protest against these evil. How does oil and gas and banking have to do with Black Lives Matter? But it does, because they're not really about that.
When something isn't right, there's only one thing to do. Make it better.
By the way, look at this girl. Look at the costume they put this Black girl in.
Thing isn't right, there's only one thing to do. Make it better.
Look at the costume they put her in. That's an American Black woman. She doesn't friggin' wear a turban out of the house. They put that on her to make her more ethnic.
Wow.
Like it's a costume, I'm sure,
Fight for climate justice.
Because a habitable
Fight for
planet should matter
climate
to
justice.
everybody.
Do you like my turban?
Fight for racial justice.
Because all
Racial
people
justice.
deserve to live in communities free of fear and pollution.
Bank for good. Because what we do with our money affects everybody.
And you can't
There
say
we
you're
go.
fighting for a better world if your money is destroying it.
If bad finance built the fossil fuel economy, good
Finance can build a renewable economy. Amalgamated, aspiration, and beneficial have
all joined the Bank for Good movement. They're not invested in the polluted past.
They're invested in a cleaner and brighter future for us all.
Nice nose ring.
Investing your money in businesses and people you can believe in.
Live your values. Be as active and empowered.
With your money as you are in the rest of your life.
Real big change.
Always starts with you.
Your
Well,
money
now-
and your values can remake the world.
Join the
If it
Bank
was
for Good.
true that they were using this voluntarily and banks could voluntarily choose what they invest in, I mean, I'm fine for banks voluntarily choosing what they invest in, but you know where this is going.
Well, exactly. I mean, this is how the left works. Oh, it's this. Listen, I mean, who could argue with, hey, put your bank in a bank that's going to promote your values? Who could argue with that, right? That sounds like a really good message, a way to, you know, create the
Empower.
society that you want. And we could do that too. Like we could say we're only going to invest in banks with freedom values. But where this is headed is pressure, actually fascist pressure, political pressure, as well as thug pressure. We're going to burn down your banks unless you stop promoting guns, stop allowing guns to bank with you, gun manufacturers to bank with you, unless you stop allowing police officers to bank with you. Right?
Yep.
I mean, it's
Conservatives.
anything they want, anything they're against, they can debank you like that, because we've seen them do all those companies, including Amazon, that poured millions into Black Lives Matter. All those companies are going to be used to deplatform. So what we're seeing with the tech companies, this is going to spread to every company and every business. It has already. It's already affected banking, MasterCard and PayPal, right? So, I mean, it's already done it.
And keep in mind, there's a bigger movement afoot to go towards digital commerce, digital banking, where they're going to try and
Cashless.
eliminate cash.
Yeah.
And we're going to have a social credit score type system like they do in China. And you will be turned off with a flick of a switch if you don't do what they say. And that's where this is all going.
It is. It's going there, and it's going there so fast. And it sounds crazy, but you can see it. Look at that ad. And, 3 years ago when was it 3 years ago, 2 years ago, 1 year ago, when they were tearing down the Confederate statues. And I'm like, dude, you can't let them do that. I don't care how much you hate the Confederates and slavery. This is an inch that they're going to take a mile, and it's going to be Jefferson and it's going to be Washington. And now here we are, fast forward, and they want to change. They want to cancel Washington. They've torn down the statues of Jefferson and Lincoln and Black
Frederick
heroes.
Douglass.
Pro-American Black heroes are problematic. So
America's problematic, not the.
right. It's not about the Confederates. So you have got these people. I think something also that everybody needs to consider when thinking about this stuff is what you're fighting here. It's not just like other American businessmen. These people are evil, and they don't want freedom. They want the social credit score. They want Chinese communism.
Well, Google had Project Dragonfly, remember, which they built a censored Google search engine for China. Now they claim they've stopped that, but who knows? But, this is the kind of people we're dealing with.
China would not have a social credit score capability if it weren't for Silicon Valley building it for them. And Peter Thiel raised the alarm a year ago. He was saying that two things. in refusing to do AI business with the Pentagon. They weren't going to help the American military with AI. Not just refusing them, but saying yes to helping the Chinese military with AI. Peter Thiel's like, are they infiltrated by the Chinese, maybe? And the fact that Silicon Valley has, I think that Silicon Valley is 25% Chinese population.
Well, I posted an article today that Facebook, a whistleblower, came out and said that.
Yeah, I was going to show that next. I wasn't. Let's show that in a minute. I can show it now. You're getting.
They're hiring Chinese nationals to censor.
So this is a New York Post story. So the New York, all know, last week got canceled. They got kicked off Twitter. You couldn't post this story that they posted about their Biden scoop. So that was obviously, if you haven't seen that story, you're under a rock. So because of that story, a Facebook whistleblower reached out to them and said, the censors are Chinese. They're Chinese nationals here on HB1 visas. There are at least half a dozen Chinese nationals who are working on censorship, a former Facebook insider told me last week. So at some point, the Facebook bosses thought, hey, we're going to get them H-1B visas so they can do this censorship work. Chinese nationals. The insider shared an internal directory of the team that does much of this work. It's called Hate Speech Engineering. And most of its members are based at Facebook's offices in Seattle. Many have PhDs, and their work is extremely complex, involving machine learning, teaching computers how to learn and act without being explicitly programmed. So it's all AI, it's all high-level programming. And they're not just censoring free speech people and freedom people. But then these Chinese nationals will learn and understand that high-level technology and how to take that back to China and do that to the Chinese, to the AI technology that they're working on at Facebook.
So
this is evil.
So in light of this, the DOJ launches this lawsuit. Now, what do you think of the actual lawsuit that they launched? Because I think this is part of what the commenter was getting at when he said, he was specifically alluding to antitrust laws, which you and I would not support. So in this case, the feds.
That's the thing. I don't actually remember saying, break them up, blow them up, but I might have said that, and I might have been half kidding when I said that. Like, I sometimes will rant and sort of take something to the extreme that I don't really believe.
Well, I might at this point, okay. Now, ordinarily, I'd say 99% of cases, I would say absolutely not. We can never support or endorse the antitrust laws almost in any context, right? Because it's so antithetical to the, individual rights and private property law and everything else. Now, I would like to see the government go after them for fraud, terms of service violations, and maybe even campaign finance violations.
That one bothers me. I got to be honest. This in-kind contribution stuff, it's like, people have a right to promote their side.
Not under campaign finance, though, but we can't have a double standard. You can't say, okay, one side has to abide by campaign finance standards and another side doesn't. So I'm just saying, I think true. I don't like campaign finance laws either, but if they're going to be applied, you have to apply them equally. But the aiding and abetting China and the whole notion of them working with a foreign adversary to build censorship tools and to aid and abet a foreign military to suppress their own people and possibly aid and abet a regime or enrich them in a way that makes them more dangerous to us. Provide them with
technology that makes them incredibly dangerous. Yeah.
I mean, let's put it this way. In a pure laissez-faire context, right? We have free market capitalism. Can a defense company sell missiles or nuclear bombs to North Korea? Of course not. So there's national security rules on exchanging technology or doing commerce with evil regimes that are our enemy, even in the most laissez-faire situation. So now we have this case where we've got all this evidence of what these people are doing, and the DOJ launches an antitrust suit against them. And I think the claim is they have a monopoly in search and search advertising, and they're anti-competitive and blah, 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 which we know is sort of specious to begin with, but you can be somewhat sympathetic to it.
If they're using government to crush competitors, I don't give a shit. Which I think that they do. You know what I'm saying? I think here's the thing. Here's the thing that makes me wonder if I am a laissez-faire capitalist. You ready? I see a flaw in free markets, or rather, limited government in our Constitution. In the history of our country, and maybe this is a flaw that you have to deal with because things aren't perfect and there's no such thing as utopia. I'm okay with that, but tell me what you think about this, Doug. There is a reality that I see that is unjust, just like trying to look out and say, look, this is unjust. So what do we do about it, if anything? And what I see is there is a possibility that people can become so rich as opposed to the other people that they live around in society that they can buy power. They can just scoop it up and have it, and then force their will on innocent free people. And we can see that happening throughout the history of the United States. And how can those people, so if you're sitting around going, well, but it's freedom, so he's allowed to just have his money and buy up power. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
at some point you got to get your pitchfork and go to the big mansion and drag the guy out, tar and feather him, and take his money.
Well, I think what you're saying is,
I'm saying if people want to stay free, if somebody is trying to take away your freedom with this immense wealth that they have, at some point, you are justified in tearing it down by any means.
yes.
And that's in some ways, that's the revolution, the American Revolution. Are we never justified to kill a British soldier because killing is wrong? At some point you're at war with people who are who will never give you your freedom and who've taken it away. So obviously we're not dealing with that with Google, but if they are preventing, say, DuckDuckGo from becoming a true competitor of them, I think that more what they do is with AdSense, and I don't think it's so much search.
They're forcing their apps onto Apple, and well, they have a better search, but they also, they enter deals with Apple and other companies to force, their apps onto their, some of that I think is sort of specious. The question here is, if we just accept the government suit at face value and we didn't know any of this other stuff, would we oppose the lawsuit? I would probably say yes. Mostly, I would probably just say, just on the merits of this case and my knowledge of antitrust, limited as it is, I would say, this isn't the right way to go about it. But what you're saying is, okay, you have this general situation, and this might be a little bit of a stretch, but you have a general situation in which you have some pretty evil companies that are radical Marxists. They're clearly opposed to some of the founding principles of our country. They seem to be working or operating to thwart the American system. They're aiding and abetting enemies of the United States. So if that's all true, should we use this sort of indirect club, this antitrust stuff, just to, break them up?
Do we get Al Capone on tax evasion since we can't get him for murder?
Yeah. That's
even though we're opposed to taxes? Probably. The murderer needs to be taken down. And is Google, are they at that level? I think that's the question.
Yeah.
Have they risen to the level of criminal organization? I mean, I don't know.
Well, put it this way. I would rather have the government say, look, you guys, we know they're suppressing political search. Like you can just go to Google and try and pull up something negative about the Bidens and then pull something up about Trump. I mean, there's a mountain of evidence that they are changing their search engine in order to try and affect the election. They've said that. I mean, there's whistleblowers that tell you that. So we know they're doing stuff like that. So to me, that's like sort of like campaign finance violation-y law. They engage in unfair trade, I think, in terms of the false advertising and the way they demonetize their enemies.
And they've lied about search. So again, they're kind of committing fraud on the general public, false advertising, which you can't do. You can't say something about your product, and you can't have say something about your product on a commercial, have it not be true. That's false advertising. And they've done that. They don't say they curate search. They don't say that they are pressuring companies with AdSense pressure. They're not telling you what they're doing.
So are they having such an inordinate impact on our country and our lives and the future of freedom in this country that we need to use this sort of like indirect tax evasion
are we at pitchfork level
them?
Or right? It's a good question.
So I think that's the right way to think about it, though. I don't think it's the right way. It's not the right way to think about it to say laissez-faire. Yes. I believe in laissez-faire. I think that's a dumb way to think about it. And it's anti-contextual. It's a context drop. I mean, what you were saying about antitrust laws, particularly in the 19th century, was there was a massive amount of political corruption in the United States. There always has been, but particularly in the 19th century, where the most powerful people, the most wealthy people in the country were buying politicians off. They were buying legislatures. You could basically pay for anything. You could beat up strikers. If someone struck at your plant, you could beat the shit out of them with impunity. And so there was a feeling, hey, we got to get these guys under control. Now,
the whole banking thing. I mean, they took banking power. They bought it.
Well, look at the advent of the Federal Reserve System.
That's what I'm saying.
Yes.
That was all oligarchs deciding that we needed a federal bank. And the Transcontinental Railroad. I mean, there's endless examples of pouring taxpayer money into their little projects and their little power projects. It was so corrupt. And Teddy Roosevelt came in and whenever you think about it, I think it's a similar situation where they're sort of grasping at how do we defeat these people. Now, long range, that did give the government power that maybe they shouldn't have.
Right. So then that's a question at that point, was it worth it to try and, strike a blow, I guess, against this corrupt system by using this indirect method, the Antitrust Act?
We have central banking.
Not really. Not at all. So tactically, I don't think that was I don't think the right way to approach, because again, they were, instead of charging the businessmen at that time or the politicians with corruption and trying to limit their power legislatively and saying, no, we need to enforce a strict separation here of, economy and state, and breaking up the Tammany Hall, in New York, and liberating banks rather than centralizing them, and so on and so forth. Like, of course, that would have been right. Instead, they vilified businessmen and said, no, these are all evil guys, and we got to, they're really the root of all this corruption. And however, like, if you go back and actually,
but they are, you know what I'm saying? They are. I don't think you go after, like, there are always people who are willing to take your money and do your bidding and be your little political puppet. The immorality of these wealthy pricks who decide that they have all this money and that somehow makes them better and smarter than the little people, so they need to tell the little people how to live. They're literal James Taggarts and Orrin Boyles. They want power over people, and so they're taking it. because they have the means to do that. You could be in the freest, most laissez-faire society, and if somebody bad or who's like becomes psycho after they make a lot of, this is what I think happens. People make a lot of money and then they think that they're like really awesome and like they get a little psycho and they're sort of surrounded by yes men, and you know what I'm saying? They lose their minds a little bit and they become a little crazy. I think Bill Gates is a little bit of a psychopath at this point. Mm-hmm. He thinks he knows best. He is perfectly comfortable with injecting a vaccine into 7 billion people that hasn't really been tested. And it's a new kind of technology. He's okay with that. And if a billion of you die, he's okay with that too, because it's for the greater good. Like, I think he's nuts.
He's for him making that decision, not you making that decision.
He is for him deciding. And, you know, he might feel a little regret if a bunch of you die, but not really.
And keep in mind that these big tech companies are the richest companies in the world. They have massive lobbying operations. So the extent to which they utilize the Congress and the legislatures of their states and the federal government and the way in which they corrupt, you know, the judiciary or whatever, that's, you know, the Ninth Circuit, for example, in San Francisco. I mean, you're not going to just, you know, Doug and Sonny aren't going to launch a lawsuit against Google and win. Okay, it can't happen. So, you know, even if we said, oh, we have got a great case, you know, they demonetized us and that's unfair. Well, good luck with that, right? I mean, this is at the point where, I mean, even
Prager is a small fish in a,
So
there is no
almost
amount of
calls
money
out for like a congressional, you need like a congressional level remedy. And
especially with the global issues involved here. I mean, to be honest, I like the lawsuit just because I like what the discovery is going to turn up. I think it's a little bit of a pussy move. I'd rather see them really go after them for actual crimes they're probably committing. You know?
Yeah, this is the most innocuous behavior is their business practices with respect to their competitors.
And that's the
least of my concerns.
Here's how unfreedom I am. I am actually for the government saying, as the government of Hungary did, George Soros, you're not welcome here and neither is your damn money. Get the hell out.
Yep.
I'm for that. If there is somebody in this country who is funding and trying to subvert my freedom in this nation and you can prove that, I am for exile. Like, that's not a very freedom position. I would rather see that than antitrust.
It is a freedom position. No, it is a freedom position.
Right. But I'm trying to say that's more sort of radical and drastic than antitrust. I would like to not have antitrust on the books, but we can have exile on the books.
Believing in national security and believing in a defense policy that exiles enemies of the state that have the power and ability and the means and have demonstrated a willingness to use that to subvert the country, that is a pro-freedom position. That is not an anti-freedom position.
So if you are a company that is clearly interacting with the Chinese Communist Party and selling them technology that will inhibit my freedoms and is a serious civil rights issue within their own country, and we have proof of Chinese corruption and spying all throughout the United States. I love that the Trump administration was just kicking out these Chinese spies out of the universities and they went on a rush of that earlier this year. And I love that Trump keeps saying, remember, this is all China's fault. This whole pandemic is China's fault. Don't forget it. He keeps saying. And we shouldn't be doing business with them. As much as that will hurt us financially, we shouldn't be doing business with them. So, you know, I don't know. I don't like antitrust laws. I think they are abused. And however, I do think that there's a lot of rotten shit going on in Silicon Valley and it has to be stopped. And it's illegal. It's anti-freedom. Let's put it that way. Fundamentally, it will destroy our freedom. This cultural censorship is going to be political censorship next. By the time that happens, it's too late. It's too late. But we're all now just okay with and used to massive, massive censorship on social media. The first time it happened, we were all like shocked. And now it happens every day. So a year to, the Confederate statues, oh, well, but that's okay. And now it's Jefferson. So in a year, 2 years, it's going to be political censorship.
And it's already in textbooks in the public educational system. So, and this is the same thing, you're saying with the technology is right now they're culturally ripening the country and normalizing the purging of conservative thought and the connotation that conservative thought is dangerous, it's unsafe, as they call it, it's violent, that it's tantamount to like a conservative speaking is tantamount to a form of violence. I mean, that's why they're shutting down conservatives and canceling people because so
talking about vaccines is unsafe. Talking about Muslims is unsafe. Talking about race is unsafe. Talking about Biden's emails is unsafe.
Right.
So
it's misinformation, or I mean, these are the same
they
terms
actually use the word unsafe about Biden's emails. Twitter did, and Facebook. So
that you will be physically harmed by reading emails about Biden's political corruption. That's unsafe.
You'll be physically harmed.
So at what point does that then get into a bill that says, well, if this is unsafe, we have to ban it? I mean, it's violence.
It's a public health issue.
Just as we have to get rid of banks that lend money to fossil fuel companies because they're polluting the environment.
Yeah.
So we have to cancel them.
I mean, people on our side, you have to, like, this is a war. You are in a war. People are going to take away your freedoms. And I don't know. I mean, I don't like antitrust laws, but I also think something has to be done about these corrupt, evil companies that are destroying freedom in this country. They are literally destroying free speech. They're doing it. And they are preventing competitors from doing business. And they're able to debank and deplatform people. They can do that. They've done it. Is that okay? Like, the rich guy in town has scooped up all the power and is lording it over everybody. That's what's happened. Is that allowed by a free people? Or do you at some point go, let's burn his house down? I mean, this is like the Antifa argument. So I worry about like crossing this line, but this is why Antifa actually works, because they are morally right. That if you are interacting with Nazis, it is okay to punch a Nazi. It's okay to punch a Nazi. If you're in Nazi Germany before Hitler, or around Hitler's time, and you have these thugs roaming the streets and intimidating people, it is okay to fight them. So are we there? Are we in pre-Hitler Germany watching? I mean, they're saying the same thing, except that they're obviously on the side of control, because we were just here minding our own business.
Well, think about it. I mean, the Nazis were going around putting, Jews and Stars of David on Jewish businesses and not allowing people to, at the threat of violence, from transacting with them. And that was the precursor, obviously, to rounding them up and putting them in concentration camps. So now we're at that point with white males and conservatives and Trump supporters. Don't do business with them. Now, it's not as draconian, not as draconian as pre-Nazi Germany or Nazi Germany, but we're on that trajectory. And
it's literally the pre-Soviet Union, because it's the middle class, anti-successful, which is funny because the people actually in the ranks are the rich people.
Right. Yeah,
it's a top-down revolution. It's an oligarch revolution, but they're going after the mass of middle class, individual rights people.
Well, because they hate deplorables because we won't acquiesce to their dictates. That's what they don't like about us.
Right. Anyway, so that I hope we've answered the question. I don't know. Have we definitively even answered the question? But I think the idea is that I don't come at this like,
it's not a formula.
Yeah, right.
It's contextual inductive thinking. You take the facts and you have to keep in mind the full context of what you're after and what your goals are ultimately, and how do you get there, and dealing with a very complicated mixed situation. It's not a formula where you just say laissez faire.
And it is hard. And somebody could talk me out of much of what I just said tomorrow if they had really good arguments, because it isn't a formula, and it is difficult. And there's a lot of we're not lawyers. There's a lot of legal stuff here. There's probably more we don't understand or know about. The public square thing is really interesting. So I don't know. I kind of feel slightly unqualified to decide how to go after these companies. I just know that what they're doing is wrong, and it's unjust and potentially dangerous for my freedom. Probably, in some cases, definitely dangerous to my freedom in terms of free speech. If they were more honest about what they were doing, it would be better, but they're lying about it. I think of that as fraud, because they're getting people to do business with them under false pretenses. And still to this day, people will say, I hear this all the time. Oh, they're not banning conservatives. They ban people on both sides.
Bullshit.
I still hear that because that's what they've said to Congress. And it's wrong. It's a lie. So anyway. All right. Well, that's it for our show today. We've been talking quite a long time. It goes fast, Doug. Have fun on your road trip.
I will.
Getting your gun.
I'll come back armed. Don't mess with me if you see me on the road.
We expect to see pictures. Hey, when you put that gun in your car and drive back home across state lines, are you committing crimes?
No. Not that I'm aware of, officer.
You better put that in your trunk just in case.
Yeah, I'll put it in my permit is a Second Amendment, baby.
That's right. All right. Well, hey everybody, thanks for joining us. Please comment. I hope we get lively comments, but I know it's difficult. It's difficult to write out huge arguments about this. But yeah, maybe if you can recommend a guest, we would have a guest on to talk about this, I think, wouldn't we? To take the opposite view, and it's a difficult topic. And anyway, leave us some comments, and we'll see you next week.
It's filled with satire and fun. It's been the demise of bad ideas, and we'll know what's right when she's done. So download this free podcast now and give perspectives you may lack. It's concise and right and achieves world peace. Guaranteed all your money back. Last time, ready?